You've been told if you keep your head down, work hard, and prove yourself, recognition, promotions, and opportunities will come. But let's be honest, that's just not true. This is Lead Without Limits, a podcast for professionals in multifamily and beyond who are ready to stop second-guessing themselves. Because leadership isn't just about titles or tactical skills. Yes, we'll cover those here, but real leadership starts from within. It's about changing the beliefs and behaviors that have kept you playing small and rewiring the thought patterns holding you back. I'm Shannon Bryant, a confidence and pattern expert, and this is the space where we talk real growth, real change, and maybe have a little workday humor along the way. This episode is brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network, delivering the latest news, ideas, and inspiration across the multifamily sector. If you're ready to lead without fear, lead without doubt, and lead without limits, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
So I am curious, what you think needs to be talked about because this topic of proving yourself, I feel like comes up a lot. And certainly, especially for women, but I think it's across the board whether it's just in the workplace, certainly I would think in your role in the military, this may have come up more than once. But I'm just curious, what is the conversation that we need to have about proving yourself?
I mean, there are so many things I want to make sure I hit, and I just know I'm not going to be able to do so. So I'm not sure if I shared it on the podcast with Simon or not, but I had this moment a couple years ago where I was listening to another podcast. I think it was one of Dr. Brene Brown's podcasts. And she was talking to someone who had this incredibly distinguished career. I mean, she had achieved she achieved really remarkable things. For some reason, I was going to say unbelievable and remarkable at the same time. And her achievements certainly were not unremarkable. She had achieved so many amazing things. And I think Brene had asked her wow, I hear your bio and I just think what an incredible journey. And the woman said, and I'm paraphrasing because I certainly don't remember it verbatim, but she said something along the lines of, it's always so interesting how detached I feel when I hear that background being read, because all of those things happened when I was proving my worth. And I don't know that anything has ever hit me as hard as that, because I'm in a space now where I'm regularly going into large association meetings or organizational annual leadership days. And at the beginning of every single one, they read your bio, right? They read your introduction for the crowd. So the crowd gets to know in a snapshot who you are, which means it is the highlight reel, right? It's 25 years in 2 minutes. And so, of course, my highlight reel doesn't say, answered 5,000 emails in 1 year, It talks about all these really amazing things that I had the privilege of being a part of. But whenever I read it, I'm like, wow, who is that person? And when I heard her say that, that really resonated with me. This whole idea of all of those things happened when I was proving my worth. And in the military, I think we set up a system to constantly have to prove our contribution. I don't know that the military would say our worthiness, but certainly our contribution and our readiness for leading at the next level. That can very easily translate for many of us into our worthiness. If the organization doesn't think I'm worthy, am I worthy, right? Which is a very quick leap I've heard countless people make over the years.
Well, I was just thinking, because I wanted to say, for people who don't know yet, who haven't been introduced to you, you're a retired colonel in the military. You have been helping leaders, as you mentioned. I mean, you've been featured Dare to Lead. So you brought up Brene Brown, Simon Sinek. I mean, these are huge places that you've been and elbows that you've rubbed. But not only that, helping companies like Salesforce and Bank of America with your expertise. I would imagine like it's just if you heard your bio, but it was somebody else's name, so not DeDe Halfhill, but somebody else's name, what would you think about that person?
I would think, damn, that girl's got it going on.
She's a badass. She's awesome.
But I think, I think I'm very lucky in the fact that I get to hear that reminder regularly in a way that most of us don't. And I would offer that if any of us sat down and tried to put 25 years into 2 minutes, so many of us would come across as like a total badass, right? Like if we got to hear our highlight reel on a regular basis, maybe we would believe more how much is possible, how much we have achieved, and we would listen less to the stories in our head that tell us we have to keep proving, we aren't good enough, that we don't matter.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, what a good exercise for people to do. Like write your bio, even if it never gets said on, on stages that you're going to be on or anything, but write your own bio because then I think it's interesting where it's like, oh my gosh, well, what are the things that I even pick? What are the things that I pick? I've done so much. And like you were saying, I think we sort of forget about that of all the things we actually have done in all of our years. So I think it'd be a great exercise for people to do.
Yeah, it is. And I'm lucky in another aspect that I get to tell my stories on stage regularly, which means I'm constantly reflecting back on the lessons I've learned. And the lessons I learned from the exact same story change over time. And new lessons become obvious when I'm reflecting on that same moment because I've changed and who I am as a leader changed. And the lessons they're kind of like compound interest, right? Like the lesson continues to grow on top of each lesson. And it goes to a deeper level every time I go into a story again, trying to find the nugget in that story to share with other leaders who are on their journey. Like getting that opportunity is such a gift for continuing.
I would love to hear one of the stories with the lessons, like especially we're talking about proving yourself. And so was there a time where you thought, I'm really trying to prove myself? Or was it more, I've realized it after the fact and here's what I gained from it?
Wow. I think it would take like 3 hours to go back and think of all the lessons I learned that I had to relearn about proving myself.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that a loved one was just accepted into fighter pilot training. And I forgot to ask if that was Air Force or Navy.
Air Force.
Air Force.
Air National Guard. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because sometimes I will tell people my very first assignment in the Air Force was at a fighter base. Well, primarily a fighter base. We had other platforms, but we had F-16s and A-10s there. And each airframe in the Air Force has its own distinct personality. And I won't go into what all of them are today, but needless to say, fighter pilots are very well known for their confidence and their belief in what they do and their belief in their contribution to the mission. And so before I actually could even know better, I was plopped down in the middle of this base where I was surrounded by fighter pilots. But I was in an office where I was the only officer. I was the director of public affairs. And so I didn't have other officers to bounce things off of, to compare myself to. And so the only people I was really able to compare myself to were these fighter pilots who were my same age. And they, whether, fake it till you make it with some of them, I know that now because they're dear friends, but they are taught like you better have confidence and you better strap that jet on and you better be confident in the men and women you're leading and you better be ready to go into the fight. And that came across in the way they interacted when I would reach out to them to try to bring media by, or I would reach out to them to bring a group of civic leaders to their organization. And I quickly, without even knowing it, took on that same engagement style and never and refused to back down when they would tell me they knew how to do it better. And I was like, listen here, you may know how to be a fighter pilot, but I know how to be a communication public affairs officer. And so you need to back down. And I didn't know it, but it was probably one of the best educations and experience I could have received as a woman, not because it made me combative, although when I was really young, that's how it might have come across, but because it taught me how to stand my ground. It taught me how to feel solid on what I know and what I do and the experience I've had. And that's an energy you can't always fake.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that also probably there's a fine line between like maybe what would come off as arrogance versus no, I know, I believe in myself and I know, and I'm going to stand behind that.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we distinguish between, am I being a little, because I'm just taking that you mentioned, there were different sort of cultures in each one of these. And it's the same in the workplace, whether it's the culture of like the different companies that you might work for, or even having a different supervisor can feel like a completely different culture than maybe the one that you came from. And so I'm just thinking, how do you maneuver that to where it's like, this isn't arrogance, but I do feel very confident in myself, especially I think, again, as a woman, that's probably a little finer line.
Yeah. It's interesting because, wow, I've never really thought about this. So I love these conversations. I always think about something a little bit differently. In I'll tell you what I think is the answer, and then I'll give you an example of what that looked like. I think the answer is confidence is with kindness, and arrogance is with maybe a degree of cruelty or unkindness, right? So because of that, I'd been told like you come across as very confident. When you hear that, your confidence grows. And so I felt very confident. Now, flash forward, it is 2000, must have been mid 2020, actually early 2020, like probably April timeframe. And like right after the country was starting to shut down, because actually it might have been March 2020, early March, because it was right before the country was really starting to shut down when this pandemic, we had heard the word pandemic, we didn't know what we knew about it. Everybody was kind of freaking out. And I was working for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Now, around the same time, I was getting my certification in the Leadership Circle profile. It's a leadership assessment. And I got the results back. And I was pretty excited about these results because I thought I've done the work as a leader. I've really looked at my blind spots. I was already featured in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. So, I felt like, man, I've learned some lessons and I've cracked the code, right? Like I know what I'm doing
I've
here.
got this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I get my results back, and the highest result on my form is arrogance. That my team sees me as arrogant. Like that was off the charts.
Whoa. Yes.
And I was crushed. I mean, anybody who's gotten really hard, not great feedback can probably relate, like,
Yeah, I can totally relate with the arrogance thing. I think I may have taken that a little too far in
yeah.
time in my life.
And I was really like, it hurt. It broke my heart. Like I really
Yeah.
was hurt because I thought that's not who I see myself as. And so luckily when you do this program and you take the assessment, usually you're assigned a coach. And my coach said something that I will never, ever, ever forget. And she said, arrogance is less about what you say and more about how much you listen.
Okay, to say more about that. So about how much you listen?
Yeah,
How
like
well?
arrogance is less about what you say and more about how little you listen. I shouldn't say how more you listen, how little you listen.
Little you listen. Okay.
And I thought, oh my gosh, because again, started COVID, we don't know what's happening. My team within days went down to about a third of what we normally had day to day in the office supporting the chairman. Because we're working for the chairman, most of our communication is on classified level, classified networks. And so most of my team who has been sent home because the Pentagon mandated that we go down, we go down to
Yeah.
bare minimum for our teams. Most of my team that's at home can't really communicate with us on a day-to-day basis yet because they don't have classified systems at home. And so, but what we had decided is like people were going to rotate I don't remember, maybe every week, right? 3 or 4 days. And every time a new team member was coming in, we were having to repeat what we said, like what we had already decided, what the chairman had already directed. And they would bring something up and I'd go, we've already discussed that. Okay. Like move on. We don't have time to go there again. Move on. And what I realized is to them, they felt so unheard and unseen. And I wasn't listening because, to get to my earlier point, I was in my own state of fear and uncertainty and insecurity on whether or not I was up to the challenge to support the chairman in this once in a lifetime historical moment. Let's hope, right? Knock on wood.
Right. Right.
And so all my own doubts and insecurities were coming out. And so that showed up in bad behavior, in me kind of engaging them in a cruel way and not listening and not hearing and not being patient. Whereas the times when my teams probably saw me as confident and not arrogant were the times I could be present and I could listen and I could support. And so I think, yeah.
And it goes back to that, like in that time, you were trying to prove yourself. And so that's almost like what's at the forefront every time. And it's hard to lead well or communicate well or do anything well.
Yeah.
Because if that's in the forefront and that's what you're focused on, then that's how you're operating, like from that place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so good. So what do you think like if you could say this is a number one, mindset shift that somebody should have if they're trying to be seen as a leader, or maybe they're climbing the ranks, so to speak, in the workplace, what do you feel like if you could just say one thing, like, okay, this is the mindset to have, or shifting your mindset into this, what do you think that would be?
Is this for leaders in general, men or women?
Ooh. Let's start with women, because I think it's interesting that it's different, perhaps, right?
Yeah. I think if I were to tell women, I think I would tell them you are more naturally equipped than you give yourself credit for. At least with most of the women I engage, right? Like there is this genre of women need to have more confidence, women need to lean in, women need to, use their voice. And sometimes I call a little bit of bullshit because I think women have all that stuff. They've just been told they aren't welcome here, or that
Or to do it different. Is that what you mean? Like, we've heard that?
what do you, like when I say, what do you mean?
Like that we get conditioned, or we hear over and over again that we have to show up differently.
Yeah, we've been told we have to show up. And let me rephrase that. We've been told we have to show up in very masculine ways to be respected as a leader. But what I know, in 2014, I taught a class at Georgetown on women in leadership and national security and foreign policy, which means I had to really dig into the research. And what I learned, like my biggest takeaway from that class, was that what teams want from their leaders are not exclusively the traditionally male, masculine style of leadership, aggressiveness, decisiveness, maybe even some degree of aloofness. That what teams actually really value in their leaders is definitely decisiveness and is definitely the ability to take action, but they really also value collaboration and communication, and they value empathy. And what this study showed was that where men and women differed at the beginning of our careers, which is really when we enter the workplace based on the socialization of our families and society, right? That as we enter the workplace, those things at one point become equal, and women over time become better at the behaviors that were once considered traditionally male, and that men become better at behaviors that were once considered traditionally feminine.
Oh, interesting. So kind of switching roles there.
Yeah. And so I always tell women, you innately have these skills. You've been conditioned by society to have the skills that teams now are saying they want. So don't let anybody tell you any different. Like, go out there and know you belong, and what you have to contribute is needed.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes back to that second guessing, right? Like I have everything that I need. It's so interesting because when I do, one-on-one coaching, it's sort of that same thing. Like you have all the answers within you. You know what to do. It's just sometimes that reminder, that guide to go, you got it. You're already there. You have it. Just go with what you know and what feels in integrity to you, and from your values and morals, and you'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Okay, so what about for men? Like, what is different for them in terms of their mindset?
Um, I think it's not that far off. I think the difference is, again, right, that study showed that what teams want is leaders who are collaborative, communicative, who have empathy. And so don't believe the narrative that emotion is weakness.
Yeah.
Believe the narrative that emotional fluency is actually strength, and it is your advantage going forward.
Yeah, I think that's good. Do you remember when you kind of realized that vulnerability was a good leadership skill, or that you needed it?
It's so interesting because we say like vulnerability as a leadership skill. And I first heard Brené's TED Talk. It must have been like 2010 when I was in Iraq. I know it was when I was in Iraq, but I heard it like shortly after it came out and was like really starting to explode.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that as a leader, I had to be more vulnerable. It was as a leader, I had to learn to navigate the feeling of vulnerability. Because when we don't navigate the feeling of it well, we opt out, we minimize, we don't do the hard things that we need to be doing as leaders. We don't have hard conversations. We don't give the right kind of feedback. I was talking to an organization yesterday and they said, we have a culture of niceness because it can feel very vulnerable to be kind in giving the hard feedback someone else really needs to hear. That's kindness. But we opt for niceness so that we don't have to feel uncomfortable. That's that feeling of vulnerability. And so,
Yeah, because we're putting ourselves at risk when we do that, right? When I give feedback to somebody, I know like you think twice before you do it. Like, is this going to be worth it? Or how are they going to feel about it? Is there going to be backlash if I give this feedback? And so I do think a lot of times people hold back from giving feedback that might be really valuable to somebody because we don't want to take the risk and be vulnerable in that way.
yeah, yeah. So I think people are being misguided because I think a lot of people, I'm going to go on the limb and say a lot of the men I encounter are hearing, I need to be more vulnerable, means which they equate to, I need to open up and share all of I need to cry in front of the organization. I need to share my deep, dark secrets, which isn't at all what I want people to hear. And that's not at all what Brené's work says either. Like you have to really dig into her work to understand the nuance of it. What she is trying to tell people is that it's not about being vulnerable, it's about being comfortable in the risk, uncertainty, and anytime our hearts are in it, being uncomfortable in that discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Well, so this, it kind of makes me think, in this where we're talking about like what's the mindset or what things we do when it comes to how we show up in the workplace. When I first like got to the corporate level, when I was kind of going in my, going up the ladder in my career. And I had a friend tell me one time, because I always crossed my arms and I was like, I'm cold all the time. She was like, you've got to stop crossing your arms. You come off very like harsh and unapproachable and all of these things. And my first thought was like, well, if that's the way people think, I mean, what am I supposed to do about what they think? And then of course later it's like, well, that perception can be reality sometimes. And I do think that followed me for a long time. It truly was, that was just comfortable. That was kind of my go-to, but I'm sure, looking back, there were all kinds of protection, sort of a protection thing probably that I was doing because I felt uncomfortable, because I felt like maybe I didn't belong in that room. So you talk about, creating clarity. And I think there's some invisible leadership, maybe like, or invisible signals that we do in that way, like the body language, the things. So aside from crossing your arms, are there other things where, whether it's in our voice, just our energy or our body language, that we're doing that's like, we've got to stop doing that because it's sending the wrong message?
It was such an interesting question. So I don't do a lot of work in like body language, but what my tagline is master the unseen, which is really learning how to navigate the emotional undercurrents in our organizations and in ourselves. And so, to what you're saying, like so many of our tells come out when we're not good at navigating the emotional undercurrent we're feeling, like those things that we push down, that we ignore, right? That come up when we're feeling uncertain and insecure. And I think I'm probably like a lot of leaders out there, and maybe women, is that I'm also trying to tell myself, like, how do I pump myself up? How do I go in to have this hard conversation? Um, and I think it's such a hard space because, like you said, things can be perceived so differently based on the story that person is telling themselves. I'll give you a great
Yeah.
example. This isn't necessarily a tell, but I was the deputy of an office at one point in my career. And I had a guy in my office who, every time I asked him a question, would get defensive. Now, he was junior to me, so it was in my purview, in my role, to be able to ask questions of what was being delivered, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
leading the organization, I'm responsible for that. And he would get so defensive every single time. And I couldn't figure out, like, what's this dude's problem? Like, I don't get it. I'm not being
Yeah.
mean, whatever. And at the same time, I was reading the book Why Mars and Venus Collide. It was a sequel to, like, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From
Yeah.
Venus.
Yeah.
And in there, it talked about how often when when wives question their husbands, the husbands perceive that curiosity as a lack of trust
Mm.
and not as like she's just trying to have an understanding. She's trying to get a check on, kind of have an understanding of what's going to happen when. But according to John Gray, that when men are questioned, they what they hear in their head is, "You don't trust me." And I thought to myself, because I certainly wasn't married to this guy, but I thought to myself, "Wow, I wonder if that is what's happening with him."
Right.
Right? So what I started to do was I started to preface, "Hey, Craig, hey, Craig, can I ask you a couple questions about this document so that I'm ready to go brief the 4-star? Hey, Craig, I really liked what you did with this document. Can I ask a couple questions so that I have a better understanding of what the next step is? Hey, Craig." And I did this every single time. Now, should I have to? No. But I did this every single time. And to say the change was almost immediate is an understatement. All of the defensiveness went away. His desire to cooperate completely changed. He really started engaging me in a way that I could tell he felt valued instead of mistrusted. And so to your point, if we have tells, and let's say we do, let's say I know I cross my arms a lot, I might go so far as to say to my team, like, "Hey, listen, it's cold in here. If you see me crossing my arms, I'm just cold. I'm really engaged. I have I'm not, no preconceived notions. I'm really interested in what you're saying, but I'm freezing." And I would just call those things out.
Oh, that's so good. And I think that gives to, we were talking about feedback earlier, like go solicit feedback. Cause I really wouldn't have, especially a lot of things just become habit
Mhm.
and, and we don't even know that we're doing them or that they are coming across that way. So, yeah, if you're really brave and ask people that you trust, hey, give me feedback. If you see these types of things, please bring it to my attention. And then being open to hearing it, because I eventually got there, but not at first. So I think that's such good advice. Because I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm just cold. It means nothing. You're the only one thinking that." No, not true.
It's so interesting because one of the things I learned from Dr. Brown's work is this whole idea of the story I'm telling myself, right? And I use it all the time. My partner and I use it. I use it when I'm talking to clients. Like it comes up all the time. And the more we use it as leaders, the more, we pick up language from those we're around, right? The more I used something as a leader, the more my team would pick it up. And so I might say, like, "Hey, we missed the deadline. The story I'm telling myself is we just completely, like, it fell off the scope," right? Because, like, that's my natural thought process. Like, you didn't deliver, you forgot about it. And they would come back and say, "No, no, ma'am, it didn't fall off the scope. We got a call from the 3-star who said he wanted this instead, and we made a priority decision." And I would be like, "That's a completely different conversation. I didn't know the 3-star called. I'm so grateful that you guys prioritized differently, appropriately. Good call," right? And so the more I did it, the more my team would say things back like, "Hey, man, the story I'm telling myself is you're really pissed off about something right now. Like,
Right.
what's going on?" And I would be like, "No, I'm not. Yeah, I am pissed. I'm not pissed at you guys. I was down the hall and so got into stepped over the bounds, got into our business. You know how territorial I get, you know, so
Yeah, it's funny how how so much more comes out when you're able to go to that place and go, this is how it is, or this is what I'm thinking, or you know, these are things that are in my head or my own thoughts about the situation. And then it helps for other people to share theirs too.
yeah.
I am curious, what got you into the military? Like, what made you decide I want to go do this thing? Because you certainly have made quite the career of it. So,
uh, complete naivete. That's what got me into it. It's an interesting conversation given where we are right now in the country as far as like cost of higher education, right? Like it is quickly going to become unattainable for
Yeah.
people, right? Um, I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa. My parents, amazing, but didn't make a ton of money. And so when it came time to go to college, they couldn't pay for it. And I was the first one on both sides of my family to actually finish college. I had one aunt who went to college, but I was really kind of the first one to like, let's do this. And so, but I knew I had to pay for it myself. I was so lucky in that the first 2 years I went to a community college and I received the Pell Grant, which means the government paid for my first 2 years and gave me a shot, right? Like I had this opportunity to take whatever I was naturally gifted with and try and cultivate it. And so at the end of that 2 years, though, I had to transfer to University of Iowa, and I still couldn't afford it. And I was working at this time. I'm working 2 jobs already to put myself through school while going to school full
Oh
time.
my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it was just it's such a blur now, right? Like I was just in it day to day. Like I make it to the
Right.
next hour, and I was happy. But I was working in this contracting office, the defense contracting office, and the deputy was a lieutenant colonel, and then like no, the director was a lieutenant colonel, and the deputy was a major. And it was the first time I ever saw the military as a professional force. Like I had never been exposed to that. And so I remember I was in the mailroom. The major's wife worked in the mailroom, and I saw that she drove a Mercedes. And I was like, how do you afford a Mercedes on military pay, right? So she kind of explained like what are some of the opportunities in the military. And, to be fair, he was much more senior than just like joining the military. You don't make that kind of
Right.
right off the bat. You probably don't even make enough to buy the Mercedes now that I know what I know, but I'm not I'm not questioning how they, diversified their finances. But anyway, um, so she's telling me all about it, and I'm like, I don't think so. And I went home that day, and there was a postcard in the mail. It said Aim High Air Force.
Wow.
I know. And I was like, well, I'll call and see what they have to say. And they ended up putting me in touch through like 4 different phone calls. They ended up putting me in touch with an ROTC recruiter at the University of Iowa, Captain Picotti. And he said, we don't want you to quit school, because that's what a lot of the other recruiters wanted me to do. They wanted me to quit school, enlist, do maybe National Guard or something like that.
Yeah.
And he said, we don't want you to quit school. We want you to finish school. And in fact, we're going to pay you to finish school. And so I got a scholarship that paid for my next 2 years of classes. And they paid me $150 a month, which at the time was a ton of money to me.
Right. You're like, how could I possibly say no to this?
I know. And then I got in it, and it was such a world different for me in that it was such a collaborative community and supportive. And the Air Force, I can't speak to the other services, but from what I hear, very similar. The Air Force never lets you rest on your laurels. It's always pushing you to grow and to be better and to set your sights higher and to achieve more. And they instilled in me a level of confidence that that was possible that I might not have had before I joined. And it's hard to not love a community like that. It's hard to leave a community like that. So 1 year turned into 25, and there are still days I miss it. I miss it every day.
Yeah. Well, you might have just, thank you so much for sharing that story. I always love to hear how people got into what they're doing, especially when there's like a 25-year career there of it. But, and you may have just already answered this question, but I am wondering like, what can we take from the military and how they operate and the things that they teach and bring those into the workplace? So if you're a leader of a team or you're striving to be the leader of a team or you're running an organization, whatever the case may be. What can we take from that into the workplace?
I think my biggest takeaway is all ships rise, which I can't believe I'm saying that because that's more of a Navy thing than an Air Force thing, right? All ships rise. I was in a program. I was a legislative fellow, and the legislative fellowship was a very competitive program to get into, which means all 36 of us who were in the program were competitively selected. I was also on the Air Force Thunderbirds, another very competitively selected program. You would think in organizations that have high achievers, type A, competitively selected, you would think those organizations would have intense competition. And it was actually the exact opposite.
Really?
Yes, those organizations were the most supportive. Those were the organizations where every single person on the team wanted you to be your best because then we knew we were our best. And when I was on the fellowship, we were all required to do research. And people would be like, "Hey, I was at the library. I saw this article. I think it really lends to your research. Here you go." Like, "Hey, I was talking to so and so and we had a conversation. I think they would be a great person for you to interview." It was just so collaborative and supportive, which meant all of us left that experience better than when we arrived. Not one of us left being better than everybody else. Like, it was a collective, we all got a great experience.
Oh, that's so good. Um, that whole idea of if you do well, I do well. And I think we lose that sometimes, not because we don't feel that way, but certainly in the workplace, more than ever, we're all so busy with like, oh my gosh, I've got 20 tasks to do. I've got a million things to do. How could I possibly think about my coworker and them succeeding and how I can help them succeed? But that's just testament and proof that that is the way to that makes it all better for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as leaders, it's our jobs to create that culture, to help everyone see the value of everyone else so that everyone does feel like they're contributing, they're valued, and they're a part of the success of the organization.
So good. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here and
Oh,
for
thank
taking the
you.
time to spend with us on Lead Without Limits. I have one last question for you.
Okay.
What do you think the number one skill that you have that really was instrumental in your military career and then even outside of that?
Yeah, I would not have known this when I was younger, but I think the skill that helped me the most was my authenticity. Like, people always told me like, "Oh, you're so authentic. Oh, you're so disarming." And I was like, I want to be smart. I want to be, I want to be strategic. And but what I know now is my authenticity, good or bad, was what allowed people to connect to me. And you can't
Yeah,
lead if you can't connect. And
so
so
good.
I think that was probably the skill that not only helped me in the military, but continues to help me to this day in my second career. Yeah.
Well, good luck in this second career. I mean, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, you're kind of on a pretty good track here, I would say,
Well,
with this second career and all of the other amazing things that you've done.
thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for what you do because I think we need to have these conversations and I appreciate people who are out there having it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Lead Without Limits and investing in what matters. You. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend or colleague who might benefit as well. This podcast is brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network, your trusted source for stories, trends, and insights in multifamily living. I hope this moved you one step closer to lead without fear, lead without doubt, and lead without limits.